justice on this earth. So it's very intriguing that if Muslims and Christians were to try to engage in theological debate, they'd be actually arguing over nothing. Because a lot of the creation history is the same, a lot of the end of days history is the same, but the critical component by which the Abrahamic traditions vary at that point is that we're more like our Jewish brothers and sisters and that we don't have this conceptualization of original sin. Thus, the motive of original sin that leads to the story of the crucifixion, thus the forgiveness of God, and then the resurrection, does not exist because there is no original sin issue. And thus the message in the Quran constantly is emphasizing the fact that Jesus, when he wanted to be forgiven, just asked God for forgiveness. So the idea here that there really is no need for an intercessor, in so many is very much like a Protestant position, and that you don't need an intercessor to be able to talk directly to God. And please, as I go, I'm trying to discuss historical perspectives and context. As I told you, I'm trying to do this three-pronged attack. I'm not trying to say one is right or one is wrong. The Immaculate Conception, the miraculous birth, the ascension, and his return are all mentioned in the Quran. But the intriguing thing, and the one thing that I would say that we differed on, that the other important thing that was left out in the Quran was that original sin also was not mentioned in the Quran. And really that's where, from a theological perspective, that's where the issue of the crucifixion and the resurrection come into play. Again, going back to that line from Deuteronomy, the Lord came from Sinai, there's Moses, and down over them from Seir, there's Jesus. He shone forth from them from Mount Paran. The Abrahamic tradition, Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the last of the prophetic line of Ishmael. Mentioned in the Quran 5 times, but he's referred to dozens of times. You know, when God says, say, or oh you who believe, obviously he's also including Muhammad in that discussion. So it's not a neglect of Muhammad, but obviously the need to refer to Muhammad is not as necessary because the Quran is the revelation given to Muhammad. His life is considered the example by which all Muslims should live by. So the life of the Prophet Muhammad is really is an important, essential component for Muslims to know, recognize, and understand. And that it's an obligation for Muslims to follow in his footsteps. Here's the intriguing thing. If that Danish cartoonist was to draw what he drew right next to the Prophet Muhammad, Muhammad would have never acted in the manner that others who claim to know Muhammad did. You follow the point? Okay? Very important message here. Okay? So that the idea here is that if you're truly to follow his sunnah, you don't lead by anger, you lead by example. And thus, that's where we can find, I think as the first professor had discussed, if you look at the 3 phases of it, the dawn of Islam, classical Islam, and modern Islam, it's the modern Islam component by which really the overall life of Muhammad is kind of lost and neglected for certain highlights, almost in a manner of punditry. You're picking things that kind of fit your political message. And thus you can see, the now current status by which Christians and Jews in America question their Muslim neighbors that are you really, part of us, not part of us, who are you? Because in essence, the Abrahamic tradition that linked all of us together has now been lost. Those stories that were traditionally told and reinforced, that guiding light of Muhammad's life as a tradition that has to be followed and respected, has diminished for secondary issues. But the message then starts getting mixed. He actively referred to Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and others as his brothers. He is a genesis of all of the best characteristics of the prophets before him. Truthful, trustworthy, honest, compassionate, patient, and intellectually reasoning or intellectually engaging. Now again, please, I'm not saying that the other prophets before him or Jesus was not. I'm just saying that, Adam was also a great man, but he wasn't the genesis of people before him because he was the first one. But as Muhammad being now the seal of the prophets, he has to then manifest to maintain the memory, to maintain the example of the prophets before him, which is his responsibility to carry forward the message of God. He has to then reflect all those great characteristics constantly of those before him. Again, you can see then the intimate integration of the Abrahamic tradition with Islam, and more specifically with the life and the sunnah of the Prophet. Again, going back to that Deuteronomy, the Lord came from Sinai, Moses, and down over them from Seir. That's Jesus. Seir is the area of Bethlehem, Nazareth, and Jerusalem. He shone forth from Mount Paran, which is an old reference to Mecca. There's a mountain right by Mecca, right where the Kaaba is, and that's referred to as Mount Paran. Muslims believe that the Quran is the record of the exact words revealed by God through the angel Gabriel to the Prophet Muhammad. Not one word of its 114 chapters has been changed over the centuries. So the Quran is in every detail unique and a miraculous text which was revealed to Muhammad, peace be upon him, 14 centuries ago. The concept here is, the miraculousness is that there has been this strict code of ethics, code of conduct, to preserve those original writings, so that the same text is repeated time and time again. Thus, there's no longer a conflict over what is the original Quran, although certainly mankind, as Dr. Ayub so kindly said, will always find a little point to make big issues about. And thus they start fighting and disagreeing over interpretations or perspectives or positions on what the ayah or the verse truly meant. The idea of this preservation is also, again, essential then to the spirituality of a Muslim, because, again, as we go back to the tradition of Abraham, that God takes care of his own, this is in fulfillment of the promise given by God to preserve the Quran unchanged for all time. A reinforcement that when God gives you his word, he keeps it. The beauty of the Quran is how much it has in common, not so much how much it differs from the other holy texts, because they come, as Muslims believe, from the same source. We ordained for the children of Israel that if anyone slew a person, it would be as if he slew the whole people. And if anyone saved a life, it would be as if he saved the life of a whole people. That's a verse from Al-Ma'idah, verse 32. The intriguing thing, if you read a Talmudic writing, look how close it is. Whoever destroys a single life is as guilty as though he had destroyed the entire world. And whoever rescues a single life earns as much merit as though he had rescued them from the entire world. The Abrahamic tradition continues in the Quran. And remember our slaves, this is the Quran, Ibrahim, Abraham, Ishaq, Isaac, Yaqub, Jacob, all owners of strength in worshipping us, and also of religious understanding. This is Surah Sad. So again, this isn't a challenge to what they believed. It's a reinforcement that what they believed is the truth, and thus you must follow that truth. We have sent the inspiration as we sent it to Noah. Here we're going even before Abraham, and the messengers after him. And then we sent inspiration to Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, and the tribes, to Jesus, Job, Jonah, Aaron, and Solomon, and to David we gave the Psalms. This is both two ayahs in the Quran. As we go to Islam as a concept, the Arabic word Islam simply means submission. In some ways it's difficult to tell you what faith I follow, because I follow what has been communicated to me by Muhammad and the Quran, which is now collectively known as Islam, but it really essentially Islam is submission. And Islam, that very term also is derived from the word silm, which means peace. In a religious context, it means complete submission to the will of God. Allah is the Arabic name for God, which is used by Arab Muslims and Christians alike. I find it very intriguing. Very often there's this reference to a moon god. There's actually no historical or theological evidence that there is a moon god in any of the traditions, including the Chaldean tradition, Babylonian, Assyrian tradition, of a moon god named Allah. There are certainly moon gods with names, but never was there this linkage. Simply by saying with conviction that there is no God apart from God and Muhammad is the messenger of God, by this declaration the believer announces his or her faith in God, all his messengers, and the scriptures that were revealed to them. And this is a very important concept about the Abrahamic tradition as it influences Islam. Because it's not merely saying, I believe there's only one God and Muhammad is his prophet. You're now testifying that I also believe in God, his angels, his prophets, his books, the day of judgment, and the will of God. It's not merely just simply an announcement or a pronouncement, like, a preamble to the Constitution. You're just saying that. You're actually saying that as an oath of honor, of respect, of deference. The Sunnah, the practice and example